A gunslinger taunted an old cowboy, but never knew he'd awaken the most dangerous man in the West. The town of Red Hollow sat under a sky so wide it felt like God had forgotten to close the door. Dust drifted through its single main street in lazy spirals, wrapping around hitching posts, wagon wheels, and the boots of men who had nowhere else to be. It was the kind of West you read about in dime novels, but never quite believed, until you stood in it and tasted the grit between your teeth. On that afternoon, the heat pressed down like judgment. The saloon doors of the Rusted Spur creaked open, and every conversation inside softened to a murmur. A stranger stepped out first, black duster coat, silver-handled revolver, hat brim low enough to shadow his eyes. His name was Wade Mercer, though most folks only knew him as Quick Wade. He had a reputation that rode ahead of him like thunder before a storm. 3 towns back, he'd shot a sheriff. 2 towns before that, he'd walked into a gambling hall and walked out with every man's pride stuffed in his saddlebag. He paused in the sunlight and scanned the street. He liked the silence. It meant they knew him. It meant fear had already done half the work. At the far end of the street, an old man stood near the water trough, brushing down a tired bay horse. His shirt was sun-bleached and patched at the elbows. His hat was older than most of the buildings in Red Hollow. He moved slow, not weak, just unhurried, like a man who'd seen enough not to rush toward anything. His name was Samuel Creed. Most folks in town called him Old Sam. They knew him as a widower who kept to himself out at a modest spread north of the river. He came into town once a week for supplies. He paid cash. He spoke little. He left. Wade's boots thudded against the boardwalk as he approached. He'd heard of Sam Creed, heard whispers in poker rooms and over whiskey glasses. Used to be fast, someone had said. Used to ride with men whose names ain't spoken polite. Wade had laughed then. Used to be. "Hey, old-timer," Wade called out, voice carrying sharp and easy. "That horse has got more life left in him than you do." A few townsfolk stiffened. The blacksmith paused mid-hammer. The bartender leaned forward through the saloon doors. Sam didn't look up at first. He ran the brush along the horse's flank, slow and steady. Then he lifted his eyes, not his head, just his eyes. They were pale gray, like winter steel. "Afternoon," Sam said. Wade smirked. No fear. That bothered him. "You deaf, old man?" "I said you look about ready for the grave." Sam studied him the way a rancher studies a fence post, checking for rot. "Grave's always ready," he replied. "Question is who's walking to it." A ripple of tension moved through the street. Wade's smile thinned. He stepped closer, boots crunching in the dust. "You got a smart mouth for someone with slow hands." Sam tied off the brush to the saddle horn. "Hands ain't as slow as folks think." Wade's fingers flexed near his revolver. He liked pushing men to that edge. Liked watching them flinch. "Tell you what," Wade said loudly, making sure the town heard every word. "I've been meaning to make a name in this corner of the territory. They say Samuel Creed once rode with the Deadwater Boys. That true?" A flicker passed across Sam's face. Too quick for most to catch, but Wade saw it. "That was a long time ago," Sam said quietly. "So it is true." Wade grinned. "Well, I reckon the West's forgotten you, and I aim to remind it." The air felt tighter now, as if the whole town were holding one breath. Sam rested a hand on the horse's neck. "Son," he said, not unkindly, "you don't know what you're asking for." Wade stepped into the street, boots leaving hard prints in the dust. "I'm asking you to draw." A woman gasped from the mercantile doorway. The preacher whispered a prayer under his breath. Sam's shoulders sagged just slightly, not in fear but in something like weariness. "I ain't drawn iron in near 20 years. "Then today's your unlucky anniversary." The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Even the wind seemed to wait. Sam slowly untied his horse's reins from the post. He didn't move toward his holster. He simply looked at Wade. "I buried my wife 5 years back," he said. "Buried my boy before that. I laid down my gun because I was tired of digging holes. Don't make me dig another. Wade's jaw tightened. You threatening me? I'm warning you. Wade laughed, loud and sharp. You're a relic, and relics belong in the dirt. He moved first, but he never cleared leather, because in the space between one heartbeat and the next, Samuel Creed changed. The slouch vanished. The softness in his posture hardened into something coiled and precise. His hand moved, not fast, not wild, just certain. The revolver appeared as if it had always been there. A single shot cracked through Red Hollow. Wade's gun fell to the dust. His hand bled, fingers twitching in shock. The bullet had sliced, clean through the flesh between thumb and forefinger, close enough to kill, precise enough not to. The town erupted in whispers. Wade stared at his ruined grip, then back at Sam. The old man's gun was still leveled, steady as sunrise. You missed, Wade hissed through pain. Sam's eyes were ice. No, he said softly. I didn't. Wade stumbled back, cradling his hand. Humiliation burned hotter than the wound. He'd been beaten, not killed, but spared. Spared like a child. Sam lowered his gun slowly. Ride out, he said. Keep riding, and don't come back. For a moment it looked like Wade might try again. Pride warred with survival in his eyes. But survival won. He spat in the dust, turned, and staggered toward his horse. As he mounted, he looked back over his shoulder. This ain't over, Creed, he snarled. You just signed your own death warrant. Sam didn't answer. He watched the gunslinger ride out of town in a cloud of dust. The street remained silent long after the sound of hooves faded. Finally, the blacksmith exhaled. Sam, you still got it. Sam holstered his revolver with slow care. Wish I didn't. He untied his horse and mounted up. As he rode north toward his ranch, the weight he'd buried years ago settled back onto his shoulders. He'd hoped that part of him was dead. He'd been wrong. Out beyond the ridge, Wade Mercer reined in his horse and tore a strip of cloth with his teeth to bind his bleeding hand. Rage churned in his chest like wildfire. He wasn't just wounded, he was shamed. And men like him didn't survive long with shame attached to their name. He turned his horse east instead of west, toward Blackwater Gulch, toward men who still remembered the Deadwater Boys. By sundown, whispers were already spreading across the territory. Samuel Creed had drawn again. Samuel Creed was still faster than a striking snake. And Wade Mercer wasn't done. That night, Sam sat on the porch of his ranch house, rifle across his knees. The prairie stretched endless and silver beneath the moon. Coyotes cried in the distance. He hadn't meant to wake the past, but he could feel it riding toward him now. He looked at the old scar along his forearm, a mark from a battle fought long ago beside men who were more legend than memory. Most of them were dead, some by the law, some by his own hand. He closed his eyes briefly. Should have let him kill me, he muttered. But even as he said it, he knew that wasn't true. Because something had stirred in him when he drew. Not joy, not pride, instinct. The kind that kept men alive when bullets filled the air and mercy was a myth. Far across the dark plains, Wade Mercer rode hard beneath the stars, fury guiding him like a compass. He knew exactly who to find. Men who hated Samuel Creed for surviving when others hadn't. Men who would relish a chance to drag a legend through the dirt. By the time the moon climbed high, the game had already begun. Sam felt it in his bones. And as he rose from his chair and stepped inside to load fresh rounds into his rifle, he understood one thing with cold clarity. The most dangerous man in the West wasn't the one who boasted the loudest. It was the one who'd sworn never to pick up a gun again. And Samuel Creed had just broken that promise. The night pressed in around his ranch house, thick and watchful. The prairie stretched endless under a pale wash of moonlight, every blade of grass whispering like it knew what was coming. Sam stood alone on his porch, rifle resting across his forearms, eyes scanning the horizon the way a younger man might scan a battlefield. Age had lined his face, silvered his beard, and slowed his mornings, But it hadn't stolen the part of him that measured distance by instinct and weighed silence like a loaded gun. He felt it now, the shift in the air, the way danger moves long before it shows its face. Wade Mercer wasn't the type to swallow humiliation. Men like that didn't forget. They gathered. They multiplied. They turned pride into blood. Sam stepped back inside and closed the door softly behind him. The house smelled of cedar and old coffee grounds. A faded quilt hung over the rocking chair in the corner, Mary's quilt. He paused there just for a second. He could still see her standing in this very room, hands on hips, telling him he'd outlived the need to prove anything to anyone. "I ain't proven," he muttered under his breath. "I'm preventin'." He moved to the table and checked his revolver again. 6 chambers, clean, oiled, ready. He loaded the rifle with deliberate care, sliding each round into place like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Out on the open range, nearly 15 miles east, Wade Mercer rode hard through the night. His wounded hand throbbed with every tug of the reins, but the pain only sharpened his resolve. He had stopped once to bind it tighter, teeth clenched as cloth turned dark with blood. He would carry the scar, and he would make sure Samuel Creed carried worse. By the time the first gray hint of dawn touched the horizon, Wade reached Blackwater Gulch. It wasn't a town. It was a scar in the earth, a place where men who'd slipped through the fingers of the law gathered to drink, gamble, and wait for their next opportunity to turn cruelty into profit. Horses were tied in uneven lines. Smoke rose from low-burning fires. Laughter drifted from a shack patched together with mismatched boards. Wade dismounted stiffly and walked straight through the camp like a man who owned it. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped from the largest shack. His coat was long, dark, and immaculate despite the dust. A jagged white scar split his left eyebrow. "Didn't expect to see you limping, Mercer," the man said calmly. Wade lifted his injured hand. "Samuel Creed." The name settled into the air like a dropped stone. The man with the scar, Jonah Crow, tilted his head slightly. "Creed's dead." "No," Wade replied, voice tight with fury. "He's very much alive, and he made a fool out of me in front of half a town." A few of the men nearby exchanged glances. The Deadwater boys had once ridden under Crow's command. Samuel Creed had ridden beside him. And when the gang fractured in a storm of betrayal and bullets 22 years ago, only 2 men walked away breathing, Crow and Creed. Crow's expression hardened, though his voice remained level. "Where?" "Red Hollow." Crow turned his gaze toward the rising sun. For years he'd believed Samuel Creed had buried himself in anonymity, hiding behind grief and quiet ranch work. Crow had let him fade, not forgiven, but postponed. "Gather the boys," Crow said at last. Wade's jaw tightened. "I want him alive long enough to see me finish it." Crow's eyes flicked back to him, cold as winter river water. "You'll get your shot." Back at the ranch, Sam saddled his horse before full daylight broke. He didn't intend to wait for wolves to circle his fence. If Crow heard about Red Hollow, and he wouldn't send just one man. He'd come himself. Sam rode north first, toward the small rise overlooking his property. From there he could see the long sweep of land, the barn, the creek bend, the cottonwoods near the fence line. It was peaceful in the morning light, too peaceful. He thought of his son, Daniel, of the way the boy had tried to spin his father's old revolver once, nearly dropping it on his own boot. Mary had scolded Sam for keeping the weapon within reach. "Guns don't bring nothing but ghosts," she'd said. She'd been right. A faint plume of dust appeared on the southern horizon, too steady for cattle, too deliberate for chance. Sam's eyes narrowed. He counted shapes as they grew clearer. 1, 3, 5, 7 riders. Jonah Crow didn't travel light. Sam turned his horse back toward the ranch at a controlled pace. No panic. Panic wasted breath. He dismounted, led his horse into the barn, and secured him inside. Then he moved with methodical precision. He shifted hay bales to create cover near the loft window. He positioned spare ammunition behind the water trough. He opened the back gate leading toward the creek, a retreat path if needed. He wasn't preparing for a duel. He was preparing for war. The riders fanned out as they approached, spreading wide to surround the property. Wade Mercer rode at the front, hand bandaged, eyes burning. Jonah Crow rode slightly behind him, posture relaxed, as if visiting an old friend rather than hunting one. They stopped just beyond rifle range. Crow raised a hand. Silence followed instantly. "Samuel," Crow called, voice carrying across the fields. "Been a long time." Sam stepped out from the barn's shadow, rifle resting easy against his shoulder. "Not long enough." Crow smiled faintly. "You should have stayed buried. You should have stayed gone." Wade spurred his horse forward a few steps. "You don't get to walk away twice, old man." Sam's gaze shifted to him briefly. "I told you to keep riding." Crow's smile vanished. "You humiliated my associate." He humiliated himself. The wind kicked up, rustling dry grass between them. Crow's eyes scanned the ranch, measuring angles. "You think you can take 7 men?" Sam adjusted his stance slightly, just enough to signal he'd already measured the same math. "I don't have to take 7. Crow's brow lifted. "I only have to take you." A flicker. There it was. The old understanding between them. The truth neither had spoken in decades. The Deadwater boys had survived on one principle. Cut off the head, the body falls. Wade's patience snapped. He reached for his revolver. The first shot rang out from the barn loft. One of Crow's riders pitched sideways from his saddle before he could draw breath. Chaos erupted. Horses reared. Guns cleared leather. Sam moved like the years had burned away in an instant. He shifted positions before the second shot answered him. Bullets tore splinters from fence posts. Smoke thickened the air. Another rider fell. Wade fired wildly with his good hand, fury overriding aim. Crow remained still for half a second longer than anyone else. Then he drew. 2 shots cracked almost simultaneously, one from Crow, one from Sam. Sam felt the sting along his upper arm as Crow's bullet grazed flesh. He didn't flinch. Crow's hat spun off his head, shot clean through the brim. The men scattered for cover. Now it wasn't a standoff, it was a reckoning. Sam ducked behind the trough, reloaded with swift efficiency. He could hear Wade shouting orders, voice cracking under pressure. Another rider tried to circle toward the creek. Sam dropped him before he cleared the fence line. 3 down, 4 left. Crow moved with cold precision, using the fallen horse as cover. Their eyes met again across the smoke. "You should have killed me when you had the chance," Crow shouted. Sam's voice cut back through gunfire. "I should have killed you 22 years ago." Crow's expression hardened into something almost like regret. Then it vanished. They rose at the same time. 2 more shots split the morning. Wade screamed. His second hand shattered under Sam's bullet, revolver flying uselessly into the dirt. Crow staggered backward, blood blooming dark across his chest. He looked down at it as if surprised. Silence fell in pieces. The remaining riders fled. Crow sank slowly to his knees. Sam approached carefully, revolver steady. The prairie wind carried away the last curls of smoke. Crow looked up, breathing shallow. "You always were the better shot." "No," Sam replied quietly. "Just the one who knew when to stop." Crow gave a faint, broken laugh. Then he fell forward into the dust. Wade writhed near his horse, both hands ruined, eyes wide with terror now instead of arrogance. "Please!" Sam stood over him, shadow long in the rising sun. "I warned you," he said. He turned away. He didn't fire again. By the time the sheriff from Red Hollow arrived hours later, the ranch was quiet. The bodies were covered. The wounded gunslinger had been tied to his saddle and sent east toward the nearest doctor, with a message. Let this be the last. That evening, Sam sat once more on his porch. His arm was bandaged. His rifle leaned against the wall inside. The land stretched peaceful again, though it would never feel untouched. He had awakened the most dangerous man in the West, but only long enough to end what should have ended decades ago. As the sun dipped low and painted the prairie gold, Samuel Creed closed his eyes, not in fear, not in regret, but in finality.